What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for listening. I wanted to put this in the top of the show. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, patreon.com/Brennan Tassif. Check out the merch store at brennantcomedy.com to get your ex-drinking buddy merch. Subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. As always, we're coming to you live from Gotham Production Studios, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
Grab me a beer and grab him a coke. We bout to sit for an hour, bullshit and tell jokes. And please don't mix it up, cause he done sobered up. Brennan T Comedy on your social media feeds. And Brennan Tassif is your ex-drinking buddy. Brennan Tassif is your ex-drinking buddy. Brennan Tassif is your ex-drinking buddy. Brennan Tassif is your ex-drinking buddy.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into another edition of Brennan Tassif is your ex-drinking buddy. I'll put a graphic here in post,
Nice. Okay.
so we're going to pretend that it's there.
Okay.
I'm your host, Brennan Tassif.
Looks amazing.
If you're new to the program, quick rundown of the show. I used to be everyone's favorite drinking buddy. It was my favorite thing to do, hang out with friends, get drunk, do drugs, get in all sorts of trouble, and then reminisce about those crazy stories. I am sober now, but that is still one of my favorite things to do, hang out with a guest. This week we have a very special guest, a return guest, the director of my one-man show, Raphael Perahia.
Thanks, buddy. Thank you.
I love how you said it like I couldn't remember.
I was worried that you didn't remember.
I was going to say
'Cause
Rafi.
you were doing so well, and I was like, oh, man, he forgot my name.
No, not at all. I was going to say Rafi because that's what I always call you, but then I was like, no, do the whole name. So I did hesitate because I was like, what am I going to say here?
I ran into, I guess I can say it. It's not bad. I ran into comedian Zach Warsaw, you know him? I ran into him last night with my girlfriend, and he goes, "Hey, Ralph!" I was like, but he was like he was so sweet, like he didn't, he didn't know that it's not Ralph, but
that's the weird thing in New York is we meet so many people, and it's like
you
out of
see
sight,
them
out
all
of
the time,
mind.
yeah.
So, you direct. Hang on, I got to make sure I have this timer on so I don't forget. You directed the one-man show that I recently did.
very proud.
It was a lot of fun. I wanted to have you on. So the show came. I mean, I don't know why I got notes like we were going to take. I know exactly what we're talking about, but
yeah, it was a little while ago now. It was back in January.
We recorded at the end of January, January 30th.
Yeah,
Got the poster, so I can always just look and remember the date.
Yeah.
But the process took us about a year almost.
I think it started like you gave me the first draft in September, maybe October.
Yeah, and I had been working on it.
Yeah, you had the idea for a while.
Yeah, so I had the idea going back to the year before. So I moved here in July of 21.
Yeah.
And then I got the idea around October, November of 21. And then we had our first sit down, I think, was March of 22.
Yeah, it was a while. Yeah.
Yeah, because we sat down and talked about it. And then it was a few months before I even got the first draft. Because I didn't realize how difficult it was going to be. I almost forgot. Before we get too far, because you have a project you're working on now, plug everything, let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, you find me on Instagram at Raphael P. Garbo. I'm hoping to have a show based on a true story about a World War II a Spanish double agent living in London whose wife got so homesick that she almost sabotaged him and the Allies.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where you read the story and you're like, this didn't happen.
Yep.
And then you start reading more and more about it and you're like, this is hilarious. And also like we have an idea of history of like these people who knew what they were doing and they succeeded in what they were doing. And it's like these guys
had a plan and they executed it.
These guys didn't know what the fuck they were doing. Yeah. And
neither
did anyone.
You love working on shows where it's like this. There's no way that this was actually real.
Right.
Because that was my show too. When I was telling you some of the stories, you were like, no way.
And I love the line between comedy and drama where it's like, is this funny? I think it's funny. But the audience is like, oh, that could be really bad.
Yeah. Which again that's something that
we had in your show as well. But like I love that line where it's like funny, but it's also it's not funny in that like way that's like
yeah.
It's funny in the way that it's like this is so real and this person instead of doing the thing that you would expect did the funny thing.
Yeah, it's funny because of the misdirect, but it's not. The misdirect itself isn't. You're like,
but it's sincere. Yeah, it's like not. It's not like they did it to be funny. Like that's what cracks me up about this story is like, she wasn't trying to sabotage them because she was like
hoping to sabotage.
yeah,
him.
she was so homesick
She just
and
wanted
was
to
in
go
a terrible
home.
situation that this was her only way. But it's like kind of funny that World War II hangs in the balance of this couple who can't get their shit together. And like to me, that's like
classic.
hilarious.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to have you on, like we were talking about earlier. So I came to you. Let's give the listeners kind of the full rundown because I've mentioned it obviously several times, but I knew that eventually I was going to have you on.
Yeah.
So I was like, I don't want to tell the whole story until you come on. And it fits in perfectly with obviously the theme of the show because my podcast is the one-man show is just a dramatic version of my life on what we talk about on the podcast.
Yeah.
With what I normally talk about with other people, it's just kind of my version. So it's basically like if I had myself on the show, what would that look like? And so I moved to New York, and comedy was not going great when I first got here. And I had ran into you at a couple mics. You were on an earlier episode of the show when I first got here. Check that out. You talk about going to clown school in Paris, growing up in...
much more drinking centric.
Yeah, much more you drinking centric. Absolutely. But I was having a really hard time as far as just getting things off the ground when it came to stand-up. And I had a few friends that told me, like I had mentioned the one-man show to them.
Yeah.
And happenstance, I ran into you, I think at a mic, and I was like, we should get coffee sometime. Not even thinking about anything. I was just like, we should hang out because I hadn't seen you since the podcast. And then I ran into you at a mic, and you're like, yeah, let's get coffee. Let's hang out.
Yeah.
And as we were sitting there, I had mentioned, I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to have to do my thing as a one-man show because this isn't really working. And your eyes like lit up, and you were like, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? Yeah. And we went back and forth at that coffee shop in Chelsea for like 2 hours.
Yeah, I had an idea that you would need someone to put parameters on the show.
Yeah, because I had no idea what I was doing. I literally wrote the script on a Word document because I was like, I don't...
But like you had a great story and you had a sense of... Like you knew how to tell a great story. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the problem. What I could see with like that was that you had this great story and you needed someone just to bounce it, you know, to make sure that like you keep it here, you keep it there, you keep it not focused but linear and well,
we had
balanced.
to keep it within boundaries.
Yeah.
Because that was my biggest problem was when I sent you the first script. And this was hilarious. It was like 30,000 words or 25,000 words. And it was so long. It was like 30 pages. It was so long. But
it was also less, like my vision for it was that it would be like a movie. Yeah. Which I think it was. Like it was scene.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we did.
And so that's how but I also thought like, I was like, you're going to want to have the right person and someone that you can trust and who knows stand-up to get this right.
Yeah, and it was awesome because you were like, all right, I'll give you a few months to do the first draft. Yeah. And I was so excited about it. I went home that day and I wrote a ton, and then I just kept writing and writing and writing. And then by October, I had sent you the first draft. So it was like 2 or 3 months. Yeah. And we
probably kept like 5% of that.
Yeah, maybe. Well, because that was the thing was what I was trying to do was I had all these bits because I'm a storyteller on stage with stand-up. So I had all these bits, and that's the whole origin of even doing the one-man show. And that's what you and I focused on was like, all right, well, you have all these stories that you tell. Well, why don't you just tell those in more depth and more detail and really get into them? And so I had forced in the first script. I had forced in like all these bits, like the Scar story and all these different things where we were trying to make it make sense.
Yeah, and we wanted, well...
I mean, I think I was trying to make it make sense. And then you went through and you were like, well, yeah, like we don't need this. I'd rather you elaborate more on this. Yeah. And just kind of fixed it.
Yeah, and then what was interesting to me, like post... Because you only performed the show twice, but like in front of an audience. Yeah. But what was interesting was like once we had an audience... we had things where it was like, oh, the audience is kind of interested in this thing. Like, I don't, no spoilers, but, well, whatever. I'll tell, but like, so like there's a moment.
I mean, it's open on Patreon, so most people listening have probably seen it.
And if not, they should go and see it.
Yeah.
So there's a moment where you talk about, like reaching like a pinnacle of your depression. and you're drinking and watching Burn Notice
Yeah.
on the phone. And I didn't realize until the second show, I was like, this would be a great moment for you to have like a few minutes just to talk about how much you love Burn Notice.
Because you texted me that. You were like, you should think of like 5 minutes.
Because like I could tell the audience was like a little... It wasn't that they were uncomfortable, but it was like a very heavy section.
Yeah.
You know, and it was a very depressing image. But it would almost have... Like, it was almost like they wanted you to take them there. Like, it was the minute you were like, I was watching Burn Notice. Everyone, like, people kind of giggled on a tiny phone. Yeah. And, like, it was just really interesting because, in a way, that's also the journey is that... And hopefully this will be what happens when you get it to a festival, when you get it to a longer performance run, is that there's audience tells you where they're interested.
Yeah.
And they'll tell you, like, they'll start giggling a little bit, like, oh, Burn Notice. And then it's like, oh, it's like the door is opening.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like we had just kind of created those little like we did it enough where it was like it was as short as we wanted and it was as clear as we wanted, but then we had breathing room.
Yeah.
And so now I think when you go back, like you'll have breathing room.
Yeah, because that was the thing, was doing it. So we get into the lab, as it were.
Yeah.
And you send me back the script. Or no, we met and you were like, this is what I think we should do as far as the script. Because we ended up changing it. Because at first it was from being a kid up until I got sober.
Yeah.
And then we moved it around on your behest, which was a genius idea, which was to take, why don't we do it like a jumping in time kind of a thing?
Yeah.
Where you're telling the story, but it's not a linear as far as like the actual timeline.
Yes.
We jump back and forth, which actually ended up being way better, in my opinion, because it was one of those things where it's not like, well, Brennan's standing here right now, so we know how the story's going to end. Like to like jump from trying to commit suicide to then jumping to trying to get sober to then jumping to spending all this money. It was like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, I think it also makes a clarity of like, I don't know. I think you give away if you go too far in the beginning, you almost give away the ending.
Yeah, 100%.
You know what I mean?
Because we didn't even talk about my childhood and stuff. When I originally wrote the script, it was like 3 pages. It was like growing up. And we boiled all that down into one paragraph at the very end.
Yeah. But I think it worked better because it
worked way better.
Yeah. Well, I remember asking, because I went out for dinner with a few people afterwards. And like my main questions were like, were you ever bored? And the answer was no. Which is to me like the most important thing. It's like if I could feel it when we were in the show that people had strong emotional reactions to it, but they were never bored.
Mm-hmm.
They never felt like, what am I, like
what come on, let's
go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the most important to me, like as a basic building block. Is like, are they focused? Are the audience focused? And so that was like a big success. And then the other thing was like that it was comedic, but it was a serious piece.
Mm-hmm. So it's for everyone listening, if you haven't seen it, it's more of a dramatic piece with elements of comedy in it. Yeah. Versus a comedy piece that has elements of drama.
Yeah. It's a serious story.
Yeah. I mean, it's a serious topic. I mean, that's what my whole life has kind of been since getting sober, was trying to help other people get sober by sharing like kind of what I went through.
Yeah.
And the fun thing, probably my favorite thing out of the whole experience, wasn't even like doing the show itself. It was doing the read through.
Yeah.
Because you were there, obviously. Your girlfriend, Alyssa, came.
Yeah, Alyssa, yeah.
And then my buddy Matt Fragerberg, who's been on the show, and then Matt Fulcheron, who's been on the show, like all friends, they all came to like kind of like see the run through. So I had Matt Fragerberg come because he's a legit one of my very good friends, and he's a very good actor. So I was like, I need you to come to kind of help me with the acting portion of like what I need to do as far as just like blocking and stage presence and things like that as far as acting. And then obviously I had Full Charge come because he's one of my best friends and he's a comic. So I was like, I need you to tell me if the parts that I think are funny are funny. Yeah. So I basically, because it is a little bit of drama and a little bit of comedy, I basically had 2 of the people I know who are the best in that arena come to like check out the comedy and then the drama. Yeah. And my favorite part, though, was we did the read-through. Everything went really well. I got great feedback, got a lot of notes. but you brought Alyssa.
Yeah, Alyssa. Yeah,
And
yeah.
she was crying.
Yeah, she was very moved.
And to me, that was like, oh, so honestly, we were so embedded in it. I know I talked to you about this a lot, obviously.
Yeah.
And I know you shared some of the same. I mean, you weren't as worried about it because you were from an outsider's perspective looking in on the story. And you were like, this is a very good story.
Yeah, I was very happy with it.
But I was so worried because it was my story that I was like, wait, is anybody going to give a shit
That's
about
interesting.
what we're saying or what I'm saying? Because I sometimes can get wrapped up in this whole idea of like, comedy's bigger than anything. Like, it's the most important thing. Like, art is the most important thing because it challenges the status quo. And I get so wrapped up in that I'm like, wait, does anybody even care what I'm fucking talking about?
That stuff is completely unimportant. You were
like,
very
to
much
me, it
like,
it doesn't. But to see Alyssa crying, I was like,
Liz, yeah. She's like, yeah, I think she was very moved by it. I mean, it's an intense story. And if you don't, like, I don't think I didn't give Alyssa enough, like, you know, I don't always like give her the full story because I wanted her to see it.
Am I saying it wrong?
Yeah, Alyssa.
Yeah. I always want to say Alyssa.
Yeah, I know. My Alyssa.
Your Alyssa.
But yeah.
For the audience listening, my ex-fiance's name is Alyssa, which is why it's so easy for me to slip into that.
Yeah. But I think
Alyssa.
that those moments...
This is why I didn't say hi to her on the train when I ran into her.
She said to say hi. So
it's such a weird thing in
New
York.
Right?
She
but
walked
it happens
on and
a lot,
go,
though.
That's Rafi's girlfriend. And I was like,
yeah,
I know
she
it
was
is.
like, I know that guy. I don't remember. Like, she was like, I know him
because it's been so long. Like last time I saw her was at the show, and that was 6 months ago.
I think she was more worried that you wouldn't. Anyway, so what I was saying, like, I wasn't worried about audiences connecting to you.
Mm-hmm.
I was more worried that because we were so close to it and because it was a kind of longer piece, that there would be sections that didn't add up. Yeah. If that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense.
Because I wasn't worried about people connecting to it because I felt like we left enough Easter eggs in there. Yeah. That like people were like, oh, that will be interesting. Mm-hmm. And like Fezzy, we all know it's a great story. I
appreciate it.
That's like, but I felt like the way we were dealing with it, we were kind of following the rules, mm-hmm. which is that we went into detail, like we had specific details. Yeah. And the details are always kind of funny because they really make it feel alive. Mm-hmm. And we kept the balance between like, oh, okay, this is funny, this is really serious. Now we got a funny story. Yeah. So I wasn't too worried about people. Yeah, about people connecting to it. I was most worried about when you do a piece of work like that, even if there's two of you and you get in real close, sometimes when you take a step back and everybody who's seeing it is seeing it from a step back, mm-hmm. there's stuff that like, because you're so close to it, you just didn't see a really obvious thing.
Yeah, and I mean, the opposite is also true where there's certain things that we worked so hard on. Yeah. And then when I said them in the show in the moment, it didn't land. Yeah. And then there were other things like the burn notice thing that it was just kind of a throwaway. Like, yeah, that's when my cousin found me. That's what I was doing, was watching burn notice. And then when we did it at the show, people were like, wait, what?
Yeah,
Like, really, like, and I was like, so that... It was just,
that was one of those examples of something where we were like, okay, I wanted that detail in there because it's an obscure, weird detail, and it dates you, but it also like it's just an interesting detail.
It's not like I'm watching Goodfellas on a big screen TV. Exactly. I'm watching Burn Notice on a tiny phone.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was definitely one of those things where if anyone's ever seen someone doing that, like doing shots, watching a small, like watching their phone,
small screen, and watching a show that's like. I mean, I don't want to insult Burn Notice, but it's not like it's not The Sopranos.
Yeah, it's not The Wire.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
and it was fun because every time I would tell you a story, and we recorded all of our sessions because every time I would tell you a story, you'd be like, "So wait, what happened? Tell me what happened." Yeah, and then I would explain it to you because as an orator, I'm very good about going into detail and things like that. Yeah, and then you would go, "Okay, write it just like that, just like you told me, write it."
Yeah.
And because a lot of times what would happen is when I would get on the computer, and this is
Yeah,
something
you'd go into writer mode.
Yeah, you pointed this out to me and I've other people have told me this on my sports podcast. We do the walk-offs, which is like a little essay about something, and people go, well, when you talk, you're so passionate.
Yeah.
But when you are reading what you wrote, it sounds very much like like someone
Yeah,
just wrote
you did it for school. Yeah.
And so that was something that it was difficult for me because in the show, I've obviously editing it, and then Joe Dorville, shout out, he's the one who edited the show together, and then watching it and clipping it and doing all that stuff myself. It's one of those things where I've seen it so many times that it's like second nature. I can tell where I'm reading the script.
Yeah, oh, that's
like in my head, and I can tell when I'm talking to the audience, which is something
really interesting
that you and I spoke about. Like we were gonna have to do the show a bunch of times to get over that.
Get that, yeah.
Because there's certain parts where I'm just talking. It is the script. It's what I wrote, but also I'm just saying it because that's how I would say it anyway.
Yeah, you're just in the moment.
And then there's certain parts where it's like, oh, you can tell I wrote this because I'm trying to be like very like.
That's what happens though. The first few, like once you get off book, that takes time.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of time.
Which is what we're working on now and what I've been trying to work on is getting it in somewhere because I put it up on Patreon. I wanted to get it out there for anybody who wanted to see it.
That's great.
And I put it behind the paywall so that way I can still submit it to things. But the hardest thing now has been like trying to get because I have the finished product online, but it's not anywhere like no one can see it unless they pay for it.
Can you get like the smaller festivals? Like I think
that's what I have to start doing is I have to start submitting because the problem that I ran into was I was so focused on the Patreon release and I went on all these podcasts to promote it and stuff. One of the podcasts I went on, very good friend of mine, Natalie Cuomo, the clip that she posted of just our interaction on her show got like over 1.1 million views.
Amazing. Didn't translate.
But
you know what? Like I think this show would kill in festivals.
Yeah.
Like I think it really needs to go to festivals. It needs you to do it 5, 10, 20, 30 times. And it will really build its audience that way because it needs to be. How was the feedback like from friends and family? Like how? Because we haven't really spoken about anything.
The last time I saw you was we said goodbye at the show, and then you went to go get dinner with your friends, and I went to go get dinner with my friends, and that was kind of the last time. I don't think I've seen you. I haven't seen you properly. Yeah. So it was interesting. So anybody listening to this, I probably already talked about it. So. And this is no shade towards anybody, but the feedback was fantastic.
Great.
My twin sister came out and she gave me a hug and she was just crying and like walked away. So I turned to her husband and I was like, what's wrong? Is she okay? And he was like, she's just so proud of you and the show. And I was like, oh, that's awesome.
That's amazing.
The only, not even negative feedback, but the only feedback I got, ironically, was from my parents because of the fact that watching, and I didn't understand it until my twin sister who has 2 kids explained it to me. She goes, Brennan, no matter what happens, if my daughter's told a story like that, I would feel bad as a parent.
Okay,
so I understand completely why, my parents felt some sort of way about it. I mean, I get it because I'm up there in front of, 50 people talking about all these struggles I went through. And it's to no fault of anybody's because I didn't ask for help. I never asked anybody for help. No. I was like, I'm just going to fucking sit and suffer in silence.
And I think that's also the point of the show is to like
show people that it's okay. You should ask for help. You can ask for help.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't even negative feedback. It was just, my dad was a little upset about it.
Of course.
Which is now hindsight, like I said, completely understandable. And we've since talked about the show.
Okay.
We talk once a week. We've talked about it.
Do you feel it's changed? Like it's made the relationship more open?
I think it's made the relationship much more open and a lot stronger because it's one of those things where again, looking hindsight, looking back on it, I completely understand. Like if someone went up there and basically, like if an ex-girlfriend went up there and basically talked about all the bad stuff that she went through, and I'm supposed to be like her boyfriend or protector, and I was like, oh, I had no idea. Like, I'd be kind of mad too.
Yeah, it would be rough, but I do think that there's an element of like healing that can happen.
That's exactly That's exactly what did happen. Was it took a couple of weeks, but then we started talking again because obviously as an artist, I'm sensitive, and I was very defensive because I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, this is crazy. And then we actually talked about it on the phone. I was like, well, I hope you understand, like, this is what I was trying to do. And he was like, yeah, now, removed from it, I completely understand. And it was a great show, and I'm very proud of you.
It's awesome.
Yeah, and so it all ended up
They were
working
just kind
out.
of a bit blindsided.
Yeah,
by
it was just,
I guess.
because, well, and that's the other thing, too, and I wanted to bring this up, is a lot of there's not a lot, because there's not a ton of support. Everyone says they want to support until it's time, and then they're like, oh, I'm busy. It's like,
always the
I
way.
just wanted you to repost something. But some of my friends were reposting, like, the clips that I've been putting out, and they're like, check out my buddy's stand-up show. And I'm like, no.
Well, yeah, because some of those are really fun. Like, they're just like,
Some
the
of the
one
clips
about
are
the
very
Florida,
funny,
the most Florida thing.
Sentence anybody
that's
could ever
hilarious.
say, yeah. But I'm like, don't, because obviously I understand social media to the point where I know, like, even if everyone puts it up, maybe,
but you know
5% of people will click on it.
The truth is, like, even people I think who came along and were hoping for like a stand-up show or were expecting a stand-up show, which was like a few people in the audience, I don't think they were like, it hits a little deeper than 40 minutes of material.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is that I was very open and vulnerable in it.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
I mean, I cried on stage.
Yeah. It was interesting to see two shows in one night as well, like the difference, because it felt like the first one was almost tearing off the Band-Aid.
Yeah.
And was like kind
first
of
one
very
was rough.
emotional, was
Yeah.
very intense.
Because my family was in the audience too for the first one.
Yeah, and it was like and it was like the second one you were like able to have a bit more fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
You were like finding stuff within it. It was a little more of a slightly later crowd.
Everyone was drinking, which was fun.
Yeah, like it was a bit more relaxed.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt like I was like, oh yeah, if you got like 10 of these in like Asheville or like a small town where you don't really know anyone, but you can like
Just
get
get
a fringe venue, get 15 to 40 people in. You did 2 weeks of that. Like by the end of the first week, you'll sell out. People will come because people will
put
be
it
like
on Broadway, baby.
Yeah, like the thing is, like New York is always tough to get people, but if you do like those fringes, people talk.
Yeah,
like, people talk, and also it gives you the opportunity to do it without the New York lens.
Yeah, and that's the other thing
really
too,
cool.
is that was probably one of the hardest things. Was so I don't even know if I think you know this, because I kind of every step of the way you and I were keeping in very close contact, but I reached out to like reviewers.
Oh yeah, they never do shit.
All this kind of stuff. Like I reached out to a ton. So when we first started putting the show together, I reached out to theaters, and that was kind of a dead end, because they're like, oh, send us a sample of the script, send us this, send us that. And I was like, I'm a comic. Like I typed this on Word. Like I don't know what you're asking for.
Yeah.
And then it's actually been a lot easier having the finished product to send to places.
That's
because
great.
if they go send us a sample, I'll send you the whole fucking show. Like you can watch the
and
whole
for
thing.
you'll
Edit
see,
it,
like if you can get on fringes, it'll probably be 2024 now. Like in spring, summer next year, like you'll get into good festivals, and you'll have like a 45-minute to an hour show that will people will be really interested to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that was the hardest thing, was the New York lens, was this whole idea of like, and I mean, it all worked out. The Producers Club was awesome, because he was just like, you just give us the money and you get the theater. Because we were talking to some other places, and they were like, all right, well, it's some of them
you
were
were
like
bringing the audience in anyway.
Yeah, and I was bringing an audience, so it was like, I don't really care where it is. And it was a blast to do, but the probably, like I said, the craziest thing about all of it, and this is something that you've always kept front of mind for me, was it doesn't, like, we did the show was over, I had Joe edit it, obviously he put it all together, I'm very proud of it, I put it out on Patreon, so if anybody wants to watch it, they can, but I still have the show. So like I can submit to festivals, I can if there's an influx of money, or if someone watches it.
I would also say it's the first step. Like you do this, then you start working on the next show.
Yeah. Well, and it's also awesome too, because like if someone watches it and then they're like, "Hey, I really like this show. I'd like you to do it. I'll back it financially."
That's amazing.
Then it's there. The cool thing is, like, I have it. It's like when you're a comic and you put together your first like tight 5.
Yeah.
And you're like, all right, well, I have something.
Yeah, you're always gonna have that.
Yeah.
And like, I guess what I was going to ask, what I was interested in, is like looking back on the project, because now I'm like, and you always are as a creative when you work with other people, which is exactly what you should do. But how did you feel about the way I was like putting the boundaries on the show, or what I was interested in versus what you were interested in?
So I found it very, to be honest, I found it like a relief.
Oh, interesting.
Because it was one of those things where, because all these things happened to me and they were my stories, I didn't know up from down. Like, I didn't know.
Interesting.
Like, the Scar story, I was kind of hell-bent on putting in there.
Yeah.
And then we sat down, and because I had it in the first, like, 3 drafts.
Yeah.
And then when we sat down, you go, listen, man, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but this doesn't fit. And I was relieved because I was like, thank God, because I could tell it didn't fit, but because it's one of my favorite stories to tell, I thought it had to be in there.
Interesting.
And with you being like, no, man, it doesn't work. I was like, oh, good.
It can kind of, I do think sometimes having those parameters on stuff like does kind of free you a little bit.
Yeah, it makes it easier to be like, okay, this is where we're at.
Yeah.
And that was the other thing too was, because you and I did the one thing we probably did actually butt heads on, because I just didn't understand the process, was the release of the show.
Yeah. Because
you were very, and obviously as the audience has been listening, you're very much, you are a theater person. You study theater. You do shows. So you were like, I remember when we were first talking about it, it was almost like a throwaway thing. I was like, yeah, I'm going to have a video crew film it. And you go, oh, that's a good idea. So then you could submit it. I wouldn't put it out, though. And you just said it like...
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I remember that because in my head, as a comic, I was like, no, we're doing all this work for that final product.
Yeah.
But as a theater person, you were like, oh, no, you film it just so you can like have it.
Yeah.
But that's not the final product.
But also I was like, you're not going to feel this is the final product till you performed it maybe 20 to 40 times.
And I haven't even...
Which is kind of crazy because it's like...
And I haven't performed it since, but I still completely see why it's not the final product.
Yeah.
But at the time, I remember being like, what do you... Because I called my buddy in Jacksonville and I go, I think I've made a terrible mistake with doing a one-man show. And he goes, what do you mean? I go, well, I've put all this money into it. And my director made the point that he's like, oh, no, we still have to like keep performing it. And my friend was even like, well, yeah, obviously you have to keep doing it. And I was like, what? Like I felt bamboo. I was like, wait, no, this is the thing.
Well, because I think you thought, oh, if I got the script, that's it. Like if I have the script.
I honestly thought if I had the script and filmed it, it was over.
Yeah. But like to me, I'm like, oh, you're going to have nuances where it's like, same. Like I knew that burn notice thing would come up. Not that, but I knew something like that would come up where it's like, oh, actually, I could write 3 minutes here and I can like make this funnier and like really go into detail, and like 5 minutes on burn notice might not work at an open mic, but in this specific place with these specific like emotions it might kill.
Yeah, because with everything going on to go into like a 5 minute deep
you don't
dive.
get that until you've done it 2 or 3 times and the audience kind of makes it clear of like, oh, we need a little bit we need a bit of love in here, we need a bit of this here, we need a bit of that here, or this. And that was
clear. Something I had no idea about. But I mean, as far as the process, that was the only thing where I was like kind of like, wait, what?
Yeah.
That was because what you were asking earlier was having someone else work on it with you. What was that like? And like I was telling the audience, and I've talked about it before, especially with you, was like it was a big relief, and it was very freeing, almost to be given like these are the boundaries.
That's interesting.
It's very freeing because you're like, okay, I can do whatever I want as long as I stay within these boundaries.
Yeah, because I guess we did that as well, like physically, like we just had you standing up.
Yeah, so that was another thing I wanted to tell the audience about. So anybody listening knows this, but I'm very high energy. I run around, I move around a lot. And during the show, it took us probably 10 rehearsals to try and figure out what we were going to do. And then towards the end of rehearsing, I had bought the mic stand. I bought like a little script stand. Like I did all I bought all these things. And we were trying to figure out towards the end, like towards the showtime, how we were actually going to do the stage, like blocking and stuff.
I remember that rehearsal. Yeah.
Yeah, because I kept taking the mic out, and I was like,
and we had to like do it once and do it twice. Yeah, like.
And then you were like, "Hey, how about you just?" You were like, "Try to just leave the mic in the mic stand, and let's try it that way." Because we were trying it like 100 different ways.
Yeah.
And I remember I did that, and I looked at you, and you kind of looked at me, and I go, "Oh, I think this is how the show should go."
Yeah.
Because it kept me on a leash. Like I couldn't distract the audience with like my verbose like. Hey.
I remember you feeling actually, like surprisingly freer because you were like caged almost.
Yeah,
You
so-
know what I mean?
Yeah, and it was one of those things where I could focus just on what I was saying and the acting points.
Yes, yeah.
I didn't have to worry about like the movements and stuff. Because
Yeah.
that's another thing
Or what
too.
you're doing with the mic, or what you're not
Yeah.
doing with the mic. Yeah, yeah.
That's another thing too that I didn't realize in acting is the pauses and stuff. Because as a
Yeah.
comic, I've been doing comedy for so long that I kind of know how the timing works
Yeah.
as far as when I'm saying things. And even I still get it wrong all the time. Like I've done shows before at like bigger clubs where I'm nervous and a friend will come, and like my buddy Scott, Scott Sandlin, who's been on this podcast a bunch, but he'll come to the shows
Yeah.
and sometimes like after my first joke, he'll get up from his seat and he'll walk like kind of like indiscreetly, like kind of incognito to the stage, and he'll go slow down. Slow down. Because especially if it's a big club, like I'll get nervous and I'll just be like, so I've been arrested 8 times and these are the lessons I've learned from getting arrested.
Yeah, and you don't feel like you want to.
Like I want to get to the punchline
Yeah,
faster.
yeah.
And that was something that you taught me. And then obviously Matt Fagerberg, who was my actor buddy who was helping us out, was you can sit in it for a second.
Yeah.
And do you want to hear the funniest thing about that whole process?
Yeah.
So we did that, and there were times where I was like really sitting in it and stuff. And then my editor, the editor Joe, when Joe edited it, he was like, "Yeah, a lot of those long pauses I cut out because they were taking too long." And I was
That's
like,
true. On film, it doesn't
but-
work.
Exactly. And I was like laughing. So, and obviously he's very good at what he does and he knows what he's doing because he could see that on the screen it didn't work, but in the room it did.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's really weird sometimes. Like if you watch a play or something that's been filmed, sometimes the timing is all fucked up. Or music as well. My dad was saying that, like with music, if you have like a live performance, sometimes you'll be listening to it and you're like, this is really slow.
Yeah.
Or like you'll be watching it and you're like, this is really slow. But if you were in the room, that was the rhythm of the room.
Yeah.
Like that was what they needed.
Especially on the first show, because like I was looking out into the crowd and you see people crying and stuff, and it's like, all right, let's hold it here.
That was like a very, it just like it has like, yeah.
Well, it's the same thing with stand-up, because I tell people this all the time. There are shows that I filmed that I thought I crushed, and then I go back and watch it and I did in the room, but like, you know, the audience isn't mic'd. There's a whole bunch of different factors.
Oh, yeah.
And you go back and watch it and you go, oh, this just seems like an okay set. But I was there in the room. It was great.
Yeah, exactly. I've had that as well.
And it's the same
so
kind
strange.
of thing. Yeah, it's the same thing, obviously, with putting something that's supposed to be, whether it's stand-up or a one-man show or even a play like Hamilton or something, putting something that you're supposed to watch live.
But that's why those things take like 10 or 15. But even then, like, if you watch it on screen, it doesn't always translate.
And it's hard because you can't feel the energy of the room.
Yeah.
So like when I cut it, Joe cut the initial batch of clips and now I'm cutting the clips, but there are certain clips where I'm like crying in the clip.
Yeah.
And when you watch it just as a clip, you're like, oh, this is kind of like, it almost is awkward.
Yeah.
Because there's no context to it.
Yeah, I can understand.
So it's like,
that.
why would Brennan just post a clip of him crying?
Yeah.
Like, that's weird.
No, it doesn't work like that.
But it's one of those things where it's like, oh no, if you watch it in the context of the show, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and also the audience has their own rhythm. Like they feel if it's more serious or more comedic or more whatever, they have a rhythm that they need you to to live in. And on film, like I don't know what that rhythm is, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Well, that's the other thing too, is that it's the audience in the room dictates how I am responding to them. Which is not how people watch stuff.
No.
People are watching it while they're doing the dishes, and then they're going to be like, why is this guy crying?
Well, it's also, it's interesting. Well, because it's a different experience, isn't it? Watching something on TV and then watching it.
Well, and I even notice it here. I would much rather go out and watch stand-up live, because I'm obsessed with comedy and still am. And it's weird because as long as I've been doing it, I meet people who are the same timeline as me, and they go, no, I haven't watched someone's set in forever. But like, I still like to watch it. So and it's so interesting with YouTube and Netflix and everything. It's like, why wouldn't you just watch the specials? Like if one night I'm sitting at home and I go, man, I really want to see some comedy. Why wouldn't you just turn it on your TV? I'm like, because that's not how it's supposed to be consumed.
The truth is as well, is like it's rare that you feel like when you're in the room, yeah, it's a different energy.
Yeah, there's so much more connective tissue in the room.
Yeah, and I've seen there's like certain comedians that I love on in real life, and then I see them on film, and it just doesn't work.
Translate. Yeah,
it just doesn't, and it's because the energy of the room works different.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing too with the show, and that's something I've come to appreciate was when I first moved to New York. I'm still really bad at social media, but I was almost against it when I first got here.
Yeah.
And then now with how much it's actually changed my life with Hannah Berner putting me on her stuff and all this.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and it's kind of been very impactful. So I'm like, man, I really need to dive in with this social media. Like in the past 6 months, like I got Adobe Premiere. I taught myself how to cut clips and all this. Like I've been actually doing a lot of work towards it.
That's awesome.
And it is, but at the end of the day, like especially when it comes to the show that we did, it's like I'd rather do this in a room than just put it up online.
Yeah. But you're building your audience to
Yeah.
get you to get into that room. That's what you want.
And that's the other thing too, is it's like a chicken or the egg. It's like, well, you can't perform in the room until you get an audience, but you can't get an audience until you're performing in rooms so you can cut clips to get the audience.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's
that whole thing.
It's a scam, I'm telling you.
Confusing me. But yeah, so how did you? I have a question. How did you feel like the week after the show? Was there like a lull? Did you feel like, because we worked so hard in the run up, and then when you've actually done it, sometimes like I sometimes feel great and I sometimes feel terrible after those things.
I felt after the show, it was weird because leading up to the show, because I was obviously, Savannah and I had broken up and I was in the middle of the move at the same time into this apartment. And I remember thinking, because at one point I was like, I don't even know if the show's going to happen.
Oh, wow.
And but I remember thinking, well, I've already booked everything. Like it's done. Like everything's moving on as planned.
Yeah.
Whether I'm there or not. Like people are going to be there, the show. So I remember thinking to myself, as long as I can make it to 7:00 on January 30th, we're going to do the show. Even in the room with you before the show started, because you and I got there kind of early. And I was like setting stuff up, and it was like an hour till curtain, and I was like, this is going to happen. Like no matter what, this is going to happen. And the week after the show, because I had taken like basically a week off before the show and then a week off from work after the show, just because I was doing, I had family in town and I was in the middle of the move, and then I knew I was going to need to decompress after the show.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, I was very anxious after the show because there were still so many things to do.
Okay.
Because I had it filmed, so I had to get the...
Okay, all right.
So basically what happened was I thought it was going to be this cathartic, deep breath out sigh of relief.
Yeah.
And it actually wasn't. It was incredibly...
Did you feel like immediately afterwards, like, fuck, I would like to do this like 3 to 5 more times?
Immediately after the show. So after the first show, I was like, oh, I killed it. Like I was like, I crushed that. And then, because I had no point of reference. And then after the second show, I was like, oh no, that felt better.
So it was very interesting to me because I obviously watched both.
Yeah.
But I felt that the first show was almost so emotional and so raw that it was a very difficult show.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't say one is like better or worse than the other. The second show,
one was definitely more emotional than the other.
I would say the first one was like seeing someone opening up a wound.
Yeah.
And the second show was you were a little more distant from it.
Yeah.
Like emotionally, I mean like in a good way. You were able to be like, this is what happened, blah, blah, but you weren't like overcome with it.
Yeah. So in the first one, for those of you listening, there's this scene at the end where I talk about my last drunk. And in the first show, it was very hard to even get through the scene.
Yeah, it was very emotional.
And then because I just kept crying and crying and crying. And then in the second show, I teared up, but I didn't actually full on cry. Yeah. Which I actually liked better from a performance aspect.
Yeah.
Because people could see the rawness and the emotion, obviously because I was tearing up and tears were running down my face. But I wasn't to the point where I couldn't breathe.
Yeah, no,
and,
you weren't overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Because that's what I felt like as a thing. I was like, oh, wow. Like the first one was like, wow, this is intense and it's a lot.
Yeah.
And the second one felt like, okay, Brennan's a little further away from it now. But it's still like a living, breathing thing. And I was kind of like I almost wish like you had like a 2-week run or something like
Yeah.
that, because I was
But we're
like,
working on it.
yeah, like, because I was like, you'll be able to be like distant enough from those stories where you're still connected to them, but it's not the first time you're telling it to an audience.
Yeah, so that was the
So
other
you
thing
can
too, was because this is something that happened in rehearsals. Even in rehearsals and read-throughs, I would cry reading it.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, I even teared up, obviously, even in the second show. So I think it's one of those things where these stories mean so much to me that no matter what, when I tell them, I will tear up.
Yeah, I mean, they're emotional. They're very emotional.
But yeah, that first show with my family being there and stuff, and like I had to, I'm like,
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough.
which is hard for the show, because then it's like, well,
It
you
feels-
almost lose track of where we are in the show, because I'm taking away, by being so over the top, not even on purpose, I'm taking away from the subject matter of what we're talking about.
It's not that so much as it's like this weird line between therapy and performance.
Yeah.
And if it leans too far into therapy or into performance, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so in the second one, I felt like it was able to be a bit more performative, because you were like able to be a bit more like you had gotten through the first one.
That's the thing, is
You
it's
know,
like,
I
oh,
felt like
know.
you had to go through the first one.
I've seen this movie
had to.
before.
Yeah.
Like, I know how this is going to end.
Yeah, so it
'Cause
was
it-
like more confident.
Well, it's the same thing whenever you watch, and I wouldn't compare my one-man show to a great piece of art, but it's like whenever
Let's
you
do it.
watch a great piece of art. No, but I remember like the first time I watched Shawshank Redemption, which, spoiler alert, when Brooks kills himself,
Yeah.
that was probably one of the most gut-wrenching moments, because the whole time you're like, what's he doing? Why is he getting on that chair? What is he doing?
You don't know
What is
what's
he
going to
doing?
happen. Yeah.
And then he kills himself, and you're like, what the fuck just happened? Like,
Yeah.
I remember as like a 12-year-old watching that movie, like freaking out, like crying, like,
Yeah.
what happened? What happened? What happened? And then I've seen Shawshank Redemption probably a million times since then.
Yeah.
So now it's still sad, but I
but
obviously know it's coming.
you're distant from it.
And that was the same thing with the show, was the first time saying it out loud in a room, two people.
Yes.
It was like, I can't believe this is happening.
Yeah,
I'm
and
up
it's
here
emotional.
talking about
Yeah.
it in front of my family. But then after I did it one time, I was like, okay, so
I did it. Yeah.
I did it.
Yeah.
And then I was able to keep doing it. And that's the other thing, too, is that's one of the things. It's weird because there's this real dichotomy. I go back and forth where, like, one day, like, I put up the clip about me showering in jail, and it got like 20,000 views. So I was
Nice.
like, this. I just got to put it out on YouTube and just get the show out there, because people are watching the clips. Like, I
Yeah.
just got to put it out there. But then I'll like sit on that for like 2 hours, and I'm like, I don't want to put it out on YouTube, because then I can't submit it to festivals, and I can't.
But also,
do my
you don't
thing,
want to
and-
do that because you want to be able to be there for them experiencing the first
That's
time.
the thing. It's like I want to do it how it's meant to be done, which is as a show.
Yeah.
And there's this whole back.
I can
and forth
understand.
in my
I can
head
understand
about it.
because I can understand that you like I've done it. It's the thing, but I will say this: one, if you think about how different it was between the first and second
Yeah.
show, imagine how different it would be between the second and third show.
Yeah, and the
and then third and fourth, and then once it only feels like it's not that there's no difference, but when it's like it's at a point where you're just like swimming in it.
yeah.
And so I think that it would be a shame to have that experience, even if it did get like millions of views and was amazing. You'd still feel like I wish that experience was in real life.
Well, and especially too because once it goes online, it's like with comics in their hour. Like once I put it out on YouTube, even if it gets 50,000 views, like that's the show. Like I can't do it again
No, exactly.
because no
People
one's gonna
know.
buy a ticket to something they watched online.
Yeah, I do think that. I think that you should save it for festivals, and also I think that I think it's great that you filmed it, and I think it's great that you
Well, it's
have
great
it.
to have because
And
then
I
I can
think
just
if
submit
people
it.
who want to see it, who won't be able to see it in real life, should see it, should see it on Patreon. But I think if you can get it to theaters and get it in real life, it's just a different experience.
Yeah, and I have a friend of mine right now, a buddy of mine who was in town. You know, we'll keep it really hush-hush because it's all still in the pre-planning stages,
Yeah.
but he was very much like, I know some places where this would resonate a lot,
That would be great.
and we can try and get it in front of those people.
That would be amazing.
And I was like, oh, that's the audience it was built for anyway.
Yeah.
So that,
I mean, the great thing with a show like this is you don't need anything. You just need
it's
a
literally
microphone.
a mic stand, and that's it.
Yeah, a microphone.
I don't even need a
that's
mic
it.
stand, just the
No,
microphone.
yeah. And I mean that's the great thing is if you could get that into places and people who need to listen to it.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing too, is like even getting, so my biggest concern obviously was all the money that we had put into the show originally. My biggest concern was like, I can't do another run because I don't have an extra like $5,000 laying around to do it. But that's the other thing, is like, if I get it into a festival, all I would need to do is pay my airfare and bring like a mic with me.
Well, the thing is with those things,
like,
like you might have to put money in, but you will get money out.
Yeah. So,
like
and it's also one of those things too, where it's like, but what I'm saying is like, it's not like I don't need to like transport like entire set pieces and stages and stuff. Like I could literally show up to Edinburgh with a microphone in my backpack and a cord and be like, hey, can I plug into the sound system?
The other thing is, people at those kind of festivals, people do talk.
Yeah.
You know, so if someone was like, yo, I saw this and it was really amazing, that's like, if you can get into that kind of thing, you can get an audience.
Yeah. Definitely.
And if you can attract the people who need to see this, like there's certain people who will feel more of a connection to the story than others. And I think, but you know, I had a lot of friends who came who never met you, who didn't know anything about you. I told them kind of a disclaimer about what it was about, you know, like we're not doing stand up. This isn't stand up, but like, this is a directed show. There's like, you know, but everybody loved it. I mean, it was like, awesome. It really spoke to people. So I think that, I mean, for me, the next step is festivals. And if you can get it to people who are like,
well, and that's the other thing too, is because it only takes one person to see. And that's the good thing about the clips, is it only takes one person to see a clip and go, oh, this looks like a good show.
This could be a
good, one producer, one somebody, one person. Like, and
I think it'll get there. And I also think that like it has a lot, like it's been born and now it has a life.
Yeah. Which is awesome. Yeah. Thanks to you.
Dude, thank you. What a pleasure. Great to see you.
You too. Plug everything one more time. Talk about, tell everybody where they can find your show and everything like that.
Oh yeah, we got, hopefully Garbo will be coming to London soon.
Coming to the UK, baby.
Yeah. And, at the moment, just stand up, Instagram. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on, dude. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. Great.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening at BrennanTComedy.com or at BrennanTComedy on all social media, BrennanTComedy.com. Check out the One Man Show, Patreon.com/BrennanTassif. Yeah. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
See ya.
Dude.